June 18th, Retirement Board of Allegheny County meeting. I call this meeting to order. Please stand if you're able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have any public comments?
There are no public comments.
Thank you. In the President's Update section, thank you. I skipped roll call. Thank you, Frank. Could we do a roll call?
Yes, Frank DeCristofaro.
Here.
Sarah Imarato. Kimberly Joyce.
Here.
Jennifer Liptak.
Here.
Sarah Roca. Amy Weiss Clements.
Here.
President Bresselars.
Present. We already checked that there was no public comment. And the President's updates. Soon we will have our consultant, Sarah Emmons, give a presentation. In her March presentation, the working group consultant focused on understanding of the current status of the pension fund and how we arrived here. Today, we begin the conversation on potential solutions. Transparency is essential, and we are sharing these recommendations publicly, and we'll release a full report in July when it is finalized. Please welcome Sarah Emmons from SME Consulting. She led the working group on plan funding and modernization and brings us the recommendations today.
Great, thank you, Board President and members of the board. I'm going to start by getting the presentation to work. It really was working just a minute ago. Oh. There we go. Okay, I'm going to start by giving just a quick overview of the working group to remind us all who they are and what the process looked like. Then I'm going to move to a summary of findings, and where, as the board president mentioned last time, the findings really focused on how this problem came to be what it is. This time the findings are going to focus on the path forward. So you'll see some of the same information, but most of it will be the findings that underlie the recommendations that I'll be making. The guiding principles were formed by the working group to, again, underlie recommendations and kind of direct a path forward. We'll talk about 3 buckets of options related to revenues, plan design, contribution and benefit changes, and investment management and transparency before ending with the recommendations. So as a reminder of the working group, many of you on this board sat on the working group, and others were included because of their expertise in county operations and finances. I'd like to thank the working group, who did a really tremendous job at bringing diverse perspectives and fair and balanced perspectives to this work. On the right, you'll see a list of staff and partners to this board and outside organizations who also were pivotal in really making the findings and the work as robust as it is. And at the bottom, you'll see, again, the timeline. Here we are in June, and I'm presenting the final recommendations. A report will be released next month that will have the full evaluation. So today, I'm going to really be hitting the highlights and then ending with the recommendations. And I'm happy to take questions as we go, or at the end, whatever works best for you. We're going to be seeing a lot of charts again. So to start with a summary of the findings, the number one and most important working group finding is that the Allegheny County employee retirement system faces a funding crisis. The unfunded liability of $1.4 billion is a debt that represents a commitment to retirees and employees, and it must be paid. That is the only way out of the current situation. We did talk about a lot of the many factors that are behind plan insolvency in the March meeting, but really the primary factor is that for over 2 decades, there has quite simply not been enough money going into the fund to fully fund the plan. Though the county's contributions have met the pension law in terms of meeting the required rate, the pension law does not require the system to be fully funded. And in fact, it's not just that the debt, that the plan has not been fully funded for the past 22 years, it's that the debt has been growing since 2004. So we'll see some data on that. So the only option that can improve plan funding and address the crisis is to adopt an actuarially determined contribution of between $140 and $150 million annually for the next 20 years. Of this amount, about $11 to $13 million belongs to the Allegheny County Airport Authority. So there is also a share of the unfunded liability that belongs to that authority that participates in this plan. The county share of the actuarially determined contribution, I'm just going to call it the ADC, must come from the county and not from employees, because one of the things we talked about last time and we'll talk about again today is that county employees are paying more for their benefits than most public employees nationwide. And that is something that, there's an opportunity to address with any improvements that are made to the plan. The county and the airport authority both operate in a constrained budget environment, fiscal constraints and institutional constraints, and so therefore the working group determined that new revenues would be needed to meet the unfunded liability, the commitment that is required to pay that unfunded liability. And while paying down the pension debt is the priority, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about that today, there are many other opportunities for improving the fund, both to strengthen investment management, which this board has already taken steps to do, improve transparency, better balance risks and costs, reduce employer costs, and modernize benefits. And so we'll talk about that today, but really those are next steps, whereas the first step needs to be to pay down this unfunded liability. So I'm going to spend some time talking about the highlights of the findings. There will be a detailed report, as I mentioned. And again, this is chart one of many, so hopefully just interrupt me if you have questions. I showed this chart last time. This is really key to this work. So at the bottom line of this chart shows the annual employee contributions that were paid to the ACERS plan, starting in 1999. Up until 2025. The top line represents the amount that should have been put into the plan were the county required to fully fund it each year. And so you can see the gap really does grow the longer that the solutions were put off. So 2004 is highlighted here because it's the last year that the employer contribution exceeded the amount that would have been required, or that would have been required to fully fund the plan. And 2013 is highlighted here because that's the last year that this number was published. In that year, as you'll recall, governmental accounting standards changed for plans that have fixed contributions, and so that number has not really been socialized or published since then. I'm using the words ARC and ADC interchangeably on this slide because through 2013, the actuary published something called an annual required contribution, even though it was not required by law. But really the appropriate term is an actuarially determined contribution because it is determined by actuaries, and thanks to Acrisure for putting these numbers together. But again, it's not required by law. The law would need to change for the county to make this commitment. We also spent some time last month, or in March, talking about contribution rates, and these graphs should be familiar to you. They were put together by the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, which manages a large database of public plans, some of which are state public plans, many of which are umbrella municipal and county public plans. The chart on the left shows employer contribution rates, and you can see the median contribution rate is 15.4%. The county is below the median. And on the right, you can see the employee contribution rates. The median there is 6.2%, and the county, of course, is up at 11%. And another thing to note is the chart on the left, which shows the employer contribution rates. Those plans that are to the far right of the distribution that have much higher contribution rates, those are the plans that, like Allegheny County, are underfunded. So typically plans that are underfunded have much higher contribution rates. And the other takeaway here, of course, is that employees are paying significantly more for benefits than other plans. So another closer look at the employer contribution rates. This is kind of a complicated graph, but on the left, on the y-axis, you'll see the funding ratio, so up to 100% fully funded and down to 0%, which is not funded at all. And then on the right, you'll see the distribution of employer contribution rates that are designed to meet the the unfunded portion of the contribution that is dedicated to that would be dedicated if that existed in the county to paying down the unfunded liability. And the important takeaway here is that of plans that are below 60% funded, so like this quadrant, oh, you can't see my mouse, but I'm looking at the kind of like bottom left rectangle. There's no plans to the left of Allegheny County, so no plans that are underfunded have a lower contribution rate. So this is just to reinforce that really contribution rates should rise with as funding levels fall. We also spent some time with the working group talking about the cost of benefits. So in March, I presented to you that the normal cost, which is the cost of current benefits for current employees, countywide was 11%. Well, the working group really wanted to dig into that and understand how those costs, the normal cost, might vary among employee groups. And so that is the data that you're shown here. So the takeaway here is that the pensions of some county employees do cost more. So we have the non-uniform employees along the top, sheriff, guards, and parole officers are shown in the middle, and the police and fire are shown at the bottom. Thanks to Acrisure, we also have these data shown for employees who are hired before Act 125 and those who are hired after. And these are all shown as a percent of payroll. So you can see that police and fire pensions do cost more as a percent of payroll than other groups. This is not uncommon. It's not uncommon for public safety employees to have higher and more expensive benefits because many of them, like police and fire in Allegheny County, are not eligible for Social Security, and because of the hazards and of the job. But it is very unusual for these employees to pay the same rate. So that is what this is kind of emphasizing, that although some benefits cost more, the contributions from employees are the same. I don't know why this is happening. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. We also looked at, the sort of level of benefits across employee groups. And the dark columns here show the median monthly retirement benefit for employees countywide. So you can see it increases from about $1,200 in 2015 to about $1,784 in 2023. The light shaded bars show different employee groups. So you can see that police and fire benefits are not only much larger, but they also are growing faster than the countywide benefits. And the sheriff and guards and parole officers are so that lighter green color. They're also much higher than countywide employees. Non-uniform employees there's so many of them, that's why the median, the average is closer to non-uniform benefits, but just to kind of illustrate the difference in amounts. And again, uniform pension benefits typically do cost more, not only because there are higher salaries, but because they tend to use overtime more heavily and because they have an earlier retirement age. So these benefits are not only larger, but they're being paid out of the fund for longer, given that the uniformed employees have a earlier retirement age. We also asked the National Association of State Retirement Administrators to look at the level of benefits and just do sort of a comparison. Are benefits more or less generous in Allegheny County than they are nationwide? And what NASRA found is fairly nuanced, and I can't emphasize enough that there is so much nuance here, and I just want to acknowledge that this is a very sensitive topic, and so hopefully I'm explaining the data in a way that portrays that we're really looking at facts here. But ACERS is somewhat more generous in terms of the normal retirement age. So with a retirement age of 60, most plans tend to fall to the right for non-uniformed employees. And then somewhat less generous in terms of the required years of service. So most public plans offer multiple pathways to a normal retirement and a full retirement, and those that do have a retirement age of 60 tend to require fewer than 25 years of service. So this is data and data points that informed the working group's recommendations to kind of frankly continue to study this issue. We also wanted to look at how the county's workforce has changed, and this is with a mind toward, are there ways to modernize benefits in a way that would that would better suit the modern workforce. And we did find from the data that the county's workforce is changing. So in 2009, the typical, and when I say typical, I'm referring to the median, employees stayed for 10 years, but now the median tenure is only 4 years. So employees are staying with the county for shorter time periods than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. That's a national trend. The workforce today is more transient. It's not anything specific to Allegheny County. But it does have fiscal impacts on the fund, and it potentially could have retirement security impacts on the workforce as well. So when people leave the plan, if they withdraw their money from the plan, they are potentially depleting plan assets, they're decreasing the interest that the plan earns on employee funds, and they could potentially be hurting their individual retirement security. So we did spend some time with the Pew Charitable Trusts and with Acrisure looking at impacts to retirement security of the current plan and some plan change scenarios that we'll talk about later in the presentation. We also looked at the sort of range of county and airport authority employees who participate in ACERS, and this was really with a mind toward understanding and documenting, frankly, that any changes to the plan would impact different employees differently. And what we found would reinforce what everybody here probably knows, which is that the workforce varies greatly in terms of salary, overtime compensation, tenure by a department and by position. And some general takeaways were that airport authorities and public safety employees tend to have higher salaries. Public safety employees receive more overtime compensation. That's the right-hand column that's kind of tiny of the left-hand table. And that employees hired before Act 125, so before February of 2014, tend to stay with the county for longer than those who are hired later. So on the left, you can see the number of employees and the average salary and the average tenure by functional area, how much overtime is used. And then on the right, you can see median salaries and median tenures for select positions. And the number of employees and this information on the left was useful just in terms of thinking about, well, if there are plan design changes, who would be impacted, what percentage of the workforce, and what kind of fiscal impact might that have on the fund. And then on the right, we identified a variety of positions to really dig down into retirement security. And the point of this was to first take a look at the fiscal problem and how that might, anything that was changed with the plan might impact plan funding. And then on the right was to identify examples, employees whom Acrisure could run some scenarios to see how their retirement readiness would change with plan design changes. It's happening again. Okay. I'm not going to talk as much about investment management for two reasons. The first is, frankly, that there is no way to invest the way out of this. That is not a path forward for the plan given the funding level. But the second and more important is that, frankly, this board is taking the right steps, and so just some reinforcement of that. But we did look at, for example, plan performance over the long term, shown in dark here. So if $1 were invested, that should say 2005 in the title, not 2000. If $1 were invested in 2005, how much money would the plan have in 2025, ignoring everything in reality that happened with the plan, deposits, withdrawals, all of that, just that same dollar based purely on investment returns. And thanks to Mariner for putting this together, compared to the median public defined benefit plan, and you can see that it's underperforming, but only slightly the median plan, compared to an index, which is the dotted line shown here. And so that was a finding that was of interest, just as the retirement board considers potentially increasing the amount of its allocating more heavily toward an index is one of the topics that the working group discussed. We also found that this is an area where decisions of the past are continuing to impact the fund with these legacy, complex, and private investments that are continuing to hurt liquidity and increase costs and potentially dampen performance, as you know. And we kind of circled back after 10 meetings to talk more about county fiscal conditions. And this was really to document that the county and the airport authority does not have $100 million lying around. I'm putting that in a funny way, or trying to put it in a funny way, but it's, a very serious issue. So really documenting that the county and the airport have significant budgetary constraints and budgetary challenges, almost a structural deficit. It could be argued that the county does have a structural deficit because operating costs continue to outpace ongoing revenues. So you can see the fund balance here, and it really has improved since 2012, but it is frankly nowhere near at a best practice level. And so this just reinforces that if there is going to be a commitment to paying down the pension debt, there will need to be new revenues. And then finally, we had a presentation from our solicitor, your solicitor, Brian Gabriel, and the county finance director to really understand the cost of doing nothing. And what the working group learned was that if action is not taken to address this gap soon, the day will come eventually. So 2043 is the year that I know Brad and his team have been talking to you about, where the plan would be completely depleted of assets. That year really does represent a cliff. So as you can see at the bottom line here shows the employee and employer contributions kind of trucking along. In 2043, the amount that the county would need to pay into the fund would go from $66 million to a projected $183 million in 1 year. And this is because the county would be required to pay for benefits as they are due, so moving to a pay-go system instead of a trust-funded system. And an obligation of this size would obviously have incredible budget impacts, for example, property tax increases, service cuts, layoffs. So it would have a fiscal impact, but more importantly, there's a really huge fairness question, which is it fair and responsible to put off to 2043 a debt that has been growing since 2004, so 40 years later. So those are the findings of the working group. Okay. So I'm just going to pause and talk about some principles toward reform. So while the working group was learning and discussing and hearing from outside experts, we wanted to pull together a set of principles that would really guide recommendations and help the working group evaluate options to move forward and frankly prioritize options. So you'll see, of course, that the number one priority guiding principle is that the debt needs to be paid off. That was the conclusion, that there's really no other way to kind of get out of this crisis. The second is to reduce future financial risk to the county. So as the debt is being paid, how can we, what could be done now to prevent a situation like this from occurring again? There are opportunities to better align costs with benefits and risks and address some of the fairness issues that we talked about both among employees and between taxpayers and employees. We wanted to make sure, the working group wanted to make sure that options were evaluated with an eye toward maintaining or improving employee retirement security, especially with what was learned about how the workforce is changing. There's continued work to be done to simplify investments and reduce costs and improve transparency. And then finally, that this is a shared problem that requires a shared solution. So as we talked about in the last presentation, this is not just one person or one institution's fault. This is a shared problem, and the path forward needs to be shared as well. So I'm going to spend some time now talking about the options that were evaluated by the working group. This graphic here is actually originally from the Harvard Business Review back in the 60s, which is, I think, when the original public pension funding problems were happening. And the city of Philadelphia has used it to explain their pension reforms, which I can also talk a little bit about in a few minutes. So this is intended to show sort of how pension plans work. You have your employee contributions coming in, investment earnings trickling in or coming in faster. Pension funding is the green portion of the tank, which is the size of the tank is the liability. So obviously in Allegheny County, the green is up a little bit too high. Expenses to manage investments and to administer the fund and benefits are coming out of the tank. And then my only contribution here is to add the glass of retirement security, because a lot of times when public pension reform is talked about, it's really talked about only as a fiscal problem. But the working group was very clear that they wanted retirement security to be a part of this conversation. And again, this is kind of a cute graphic, or at least I think it is, but this is a really serious issue, and so I just want to acknowledge that this is used for illustrative purposes and not because there's anything to laugh about today. So the first set of options that the working group talked about were options to come up with additional revenue. The premise being that the county and the airport authority required a combined $90 to $100 million more than is currently being put in annually to fully fund the plan within 20 years. So we're really talking about the blue pipe here of employer contributions, and of course this funding, as we talked about, must come from the employers and not employees, because it would not be fair to have them pay it any more for their benefits. The working group commissioned the University of Chicago Center for Municipal Finance to evaluate options, not just for the amount of money, but for a range of criteria which are listed in the appendix to this presentation. So they looked at, how feasible the revenue option would be. Is it fair? Is it regressive? Is there a precedent in Pennsylvania? Is it connected to pensions? And a full memo, a research memo from the University of Chicago will be a part of the final report. The working group considered, with University of Chicago's help, over 20 revenue and one cost-sharing option to meet the actuarially determined contribution. Again, the target is between 90 and 100 million, because the assumption is the county is already putting in and the airport authority are already putting in about $50 million combined per year. And I won't go into detail about all of these options. There will be a detailed report that shows, what rates were considered. Again, the target was $100 million. Some of these taxes just do not have a broad enough base to make that any kind of reality. And so those are the ones that are not shown on the left. On the left, you'll see there are 4 revenue options that could generate over $100 million per year. There are pluses and minuses and trade-offs to all of these, and those will be considered in the final report. And the working group did feel that it was appropriate to stop short of recommending one revenue option coming out of this. The idea was to size a solution to fit the problem, rather than to say this is the one revenue option. That was kind of beyond the scope of the task at hand. So those are the 4 options, and I will pause here just because this is kind of the meat of the presentation. Does anybody have any questions while we're going through this? Not about these? Okay. We also considered, as a group, the working group with me, considered, not the royal we, options to change plan design, change benefits, and change the contribution structure, because that fixed and matching contribution structure, if the number one finding is to adopt an ADC, it has to change. Of course, there's a balancing act with any consideration of plan design changes. They affect employees and retirement security. They affect the employer and the workforce management goals that the employer has, and of course they impact the taxpayers and the need for efficient delivery of public services that they are receiving in the present rather than paying for in the past. And there is a tremendous range, because there's a tremendous range among employees in terms of the tenure and wages and their access to outside savings, frankly, there will be no one-size-fits-all solution. So we did a lot of work with the working group and with Pew Charitable Trusts and with Acrisure, but again, kind of stopped short of saying this is the path forward, because there is a lot of nuance here. But the full evaluation, again, will be in the final report. And of course, this is kind of the piece of the work that really does impact employees the most. So identifying any kind of path forward requires, of course, collaboration and planning and, frankly, negotiation and further analysis. Dang it. Okay. Okay, so these are the options that we looked at to evaluate plan design, benefit, and contribution changes. And again, the ones that sort of rose to the top as being necessary or viable paths forward, in this case it's really necessary, is to fully fund the plan by adopting an employer ADC, so get rid of the matching and fixed contribution rates and move to an employer contribution rate that really does allow the plan to be fully funded in a reasonable time period. And then to adopt other risk-sharing measures that allow flexibility on the employer side. So I think I talked about this last time, but plans that have a fixed contribution rate that's fixed as a percentage of payroll every year typically have some sort of flexibility either on the cost or benefit, the contribution or benefit side built in. So some sort of ceiling or floor that rates can rise and fall to adapt to changing fiscal circumstances, or options to make changes on the benefit side that automatically kick in or allow the board to do so when it's needed. So in the case of Allegheny County, for example, linking COLAs to investment returns could be an option. Determining employee rates on an actuarial basis could be an option. But there are a number of other options that would allow for better risk sharing as well that are listed in the other boxes. I'm going to show a couple of slides that talk about the different options to either limit benefits or change plan design options, just to kind of give you an example of what the working group looked at. So the working group spent some time with researchers from the Pew Charitable Trust to understand the impacts on retirement security. I forgot to mention, this is kind of an important point that I forgot to mention on the previous slide. The first step of the working group when talking about plan design, contribution, and benefit changes was to examine the fiscal impact. And what the number one finding was that revenue target didn't change a whole lot. It was still a lot of money that would be owed on an annual basis. So changing plan design became less about like the fiscal impact and more about what does this mean for employees? Is it better, worse, whatever? Does it balance risks better? And so I just wanted to make that point before we dive in here. So we asked for help from the Pew Charitable Trusts to look at the current defined benefit plan, and in these three example employee charts, that's the dark colored bar on the left, compared to a side-by-side hybrid defined benefit and defined contribution plan, which is increasingly common in the public sector, a defined contribution plan instead of a defined benefit plan, and then a cash balance plan, which is a type of defined benefit plan that is pretty uncommon. I think that Nebraska has a cash balance type of plan. And what the researchers from Pew found is that the current plan, the DB plan, does relatively well for career workers who start young and retire at age 60. But actually, that employee would do better if they stayed until age 65 with the other types of plans. But for younger workers who, for example, left at 15 years of service, the defined benefit plan does much, much worse than the other types of plans. And that's because it's not portable. So that's an important consideration as we understand that tenure with the county is shortening, just a consideration related to modernizing benefits. I will also point out here that the defined benefit plan, the one aspect of it that is kind of beneficial for those career workers is that it leaves that worker less exposed to risk. So the reason that the other bars are shown with hatched columns as part of it, that's under a low return rate scenario. So if you had a defined benefit plan and the returns weren't what they were promised to be or expected to be, that employee would receive less, and that's an important consideration as well. So this risk and benefit trade-off, that conversation that must be had. We also worked with Acrisure to understand a number of other scenarios and impacts on retirement ratio. I didn't explain what the retirement ratio is, but just quickly, it's the amount of take-home pay that is available to an employee in retirement. So it's usually a percentage of salary. And the number one finding that Pew found is that with a 97% replacement rate for a career worker, the county's plan does very well. So that's just a kind of a threshold to keep in mind. Anyway, Acrisure evaluated retirement security for the example employees that I showed you earlier under various plan design changes, including limiting pensionable compensation to $100,000. We talked about that. There was a cap on pensionable compensation through 1999. It was about $65,000 at that time, so in today's dollars, it'd be about $100,000. So as an exercise, not because it's a recommendation, but just as an exercise, that was the the first scenario that was analyzed, limiting pension benefits to 50% of the maximum Social Security wage benefit, which is also about $90,000. 50% would be about $90,000 today. A stacked hybrid plan, so this would be a defined benefit up to $65,000 of compensation with all compensation on top of that going into defined contribution plan. This is what the city of Philadelphia has. It's actually unique. I don't think we found another plan that's like that. And again, these were thought exercises, these are not recommendations. A defined contribution plan, and then an increase in retirement age, because as we know, we talked about it's lower here in Allegheny County than it is elsewhere. And so the main takeaway from this, not to go into detail because again, you can see the results and there will be more information in the final report. The impacts really varied widely depending on the position. And so that's kind of the takeaway here, is that the working group wanted to understand that there's a lot of variety and more conversation and analysis is needed. And then finally, we looked at options to improve investment and pension management. And again, this board has taken recent steps to make improvements in these areas, and the recommendations to continue with that work will be in the report and are shown here. But the broad question was asked, what are some other ways that management can be improved to reduce costs, improve transparency, and maximize plan assets? And so there are a lot of worthwhile ideas on this slide, but I think the primary ones that were talked about by the working group are continuing again with a lot of the work that the board is already doing to reduce the allocation to emerging managers and direct private investments, to reduce the number of managers, and reducing the number of consultants was a good step as well. Not making direct private investments until making an ADC, or at least until funding improves, and implementing stress testing as a regular practice, just so that can be prepared for the board and the public can be prepared for risks, as well as indexing as much of the public portfolio of the fund as possible, which would certainly reduce costs and potentially improve performance. Okay, so with all of the options that were recommended, all of the options that were evaluated, the working group wanted to land on a set of recommendations that were guided by the data and guided by the evaluation, and really developed a clear strategy, but they stopped short of being an implementation plan. So I hope I'm stating that enough. This is the path forward, but there's still a lot more work and discussion that needs to happen. So the first recommendation is that the retirement board should publish an ADC. So that, again, the last time this was published was in 2013, in its annual actuarial report. And the county and the airport authority should commit to a strategy to make this amount annually until the plan is fully funded. To do so, the county and stakeholders will need to commit to pursuing broad-based, stable revenue options, or one option or more than one option, that really distribute the burden for this shared problem. When this new revenue is secured, the board should consider reducing employee contribution rates, at least for lower wage or non-uniform employees, because they are frankly quite high nationally. The county, ACERS, and the board should work with the airport authority to ensure that the airport is contributing its share of the ADC when this change occurs, and contributing to true employer costs, especially for county employees who work overtime at the airport. So just another look at how those costs are distributed. No benefit improvements, including COLAs, for retirees should be made until the plan is better funded, and benefit improvements should not be made permanent without an actuarially sound way to pay for them. The county should lead a collaborative process to consider changing the plan designs, including some of the options that we talked about today, where the plan may be an outlier or where it might not be meeting the needs of its modern workforce, to improve risk sharing, reduce employer costs, and again, modernize benefits. There are also recommendations related to investment and transparency that came out of this work. Again, I can't stress enough that the primary function of this work was really to focus on the debt. and paying that off. But there are recommendations related to reallocating toward public equity, indexing more of the funds, continuing to divest from direct investments and private equity, consider rotating investment consultants every 3 to 5 years to ensure fresh perspectives. Direct investments and emerging manager programs could be put on hold permanently, or at least until the fund achieves an agreed upon funding status or is no longer distressed. And this fourth one, I think, is kind of an easy first step. I think that there should be a popular investment report, kind of similar to the popular financial report that the Controller's Office puts out, that ensures greater transparency and understanding of how assets are invested and how they are performing, just kind of a member education as well. I believe there was a member handbook that at one point was published, and one of the aspects that Pew talked about is that employees tend to not really understand retirement vehicles and retirement security concepts, and certainly investments are complicated for everybody. So that would be kind of an easy first step, I think, towards transparency. So I'll stop there. If anybody has any questions for me. Oops, I didn't know I was doing that, sorry.
Are there any questions from the board? Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you have anything? I have a couple comments I'd like to make. I'd like to thank the members of the working group, our consultant Sarah Emmons of SME Consulting, and our long-term partners at Mariner Institutional and Acrisure, the research organizations we worked with, including the University of Chicago Center for Municipal Finance, NASRA, Pew Charitable Trust, several staff from the Philadelphia government, and everyone who's contributed their time and expertise to this effort. As treasurer and as president of the retirement board, my responsibility is to help ensure the long-term strength and sustainability of our pension system. At its core, this is about keeping the promise to the employees and retirees who have dedicated their careers to serving the residents of Allegheny County. This presentation and its forthcoming reports make clear that the promise we made is not in danger of being broken. Retirees will receive the benefits they earned. The question is not whether we pay this obligation, but how much more expensive it becomes if we continue to delay addressing this. The pension funding challenges facing Allegheny County did not emerge overnight, and they will not be solved overnight. This work shines additional light on a problem that's been building for decades. Today, we are presented with various paths that we must seriously consider. In many ways, the easiest time to address this challenge was years ago, but none of the options available to us, while none of the options before us is simple, it is far easier to solve this problem now than to postpone action for another decade. Not only will a stronger pension mean keeping our promises to our retirees and employees, but it will put the county on a stronger financial footing. It will improve our bond ratings while also supporting employee recruitment and retention. This is a shared problem, and it requires a shared solution. This presentation and the forthcoming report will help provide the foundation for the conversations ahead. I look forward to working collaboratively to determine the responsible path forward to ensure the welfare not only of our employees and retirees, but the long-term health of our pension fund. That was my piece. Thank you, Sarah. And a couple words on Sarah Emmons. It's been just an absolute pleasure to work with you since October. You've brought together a tremendous number of resources from across the country and have, in many ways, put together what's just a huge amount of information into digestible pieces that could be discussed and documented. So thank you very much for the work for this group.
Thank you.
All right, regular board business. One more president update. We'll be forming a subcommittee, a hiring subcommittee for the director position in the retirement office. I'll be appointing Sarah Roca as chair of that committee, Amy Wise Clements as a member Innamorato or a designee also on that group, and myself or a designee. And I have no other updates. Carol, could you walk us through board approvals?
Yes, thank you. Next on the agenda for board approvals is a motion to approve the board meeting minutes for the May 21st, 2026 board meeting.
Motion?
Hearing a motion and a second, is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? Motion passes.
The next motion is to accept the financial statements, which include the pension fund assets, the statement of changes in plan net assets, and the Retirement Board of Allegheny County balance sheet for April 2026.
Motion?
Second.
Hearing a motion and a second, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? The motion passes.
The next agenda item is applications. There's a motion to approve the following June 2026 applications. The attached applications have been filed with the Retirement Office for pension approval by the board. There are 8 early voluntary, 11 full retirements, and 1 payment plan.
Make that motion.
Second?
Hearing a motion and a second, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? The motion passes.
The next agenda item is the independent medical exam opinion for disability application approvals. The first motion is to approve that member number 100836, upon the recommendation of 3 designated physicians, is not totally and permanently disabled from any gainful employment in Allegheny County.
Make that motion.
FJ Costa, MD.
Make that motion.
Second?
Hearing a motion and a second, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? Motion passes.
Next motion is to approve that member number 104933, upon the recommendation of 3 designated physicians, is not totally and permanently disabled from any gainful employment in Allegheny County, from FJ Costa, MD.
Make that motion.
Second?
Hearing a motion and a second, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? Motion passes.
And the final motion is to approve that member number 099485, upon the recommendation of 3 designated physicians, is totally and permanently disabled from gainful employment in Allegheny County, signed FJ Costa, MD.
Make that. Second.
Hearing a motion and a second, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any abstaining or opposed? Motion passes. Next, we have the section for reports. Carol Uminski from our retirement office will be delivering the monthly report.
Thank you. If you turn to the Directors tab, I'll highlight a few areas on the dashboard. Retiree payroll is slightly under $13 million this month, up 4.5% from last year, which remains within the trend between 4 to 5% from the previous year. Total contributions are up 3.55%. Contribution refunds are doubled as per this time this last year. As Walt also mentioned this in last month's dashboard, we can investigate this. The number of refunds have also increased by 43%. If you go down to the bottom of the page, we have membership listed out by active, payees, and deferred vested members. On the next page, total retirements are in line with the previous reports. We have a current total of 144 year-to-date, slightly down by 5.26% from this time last year. Office estimates are down by 16% compared to last year, which is our expectation as the online portal usage is increasing. It is almost up 53% from last year. Moving to capital calls, there was one processed as of the last meeting for $12,588. And lastly, the operating budget as of May 31st is listed. Are there any questions on the dashboard items? Under board approvals, we do have a motion to approve the 2025 annual report for printing and mailing. An updated version of the report is included in this month's board materials. Edits include an updated board president's letter, as well as some small typographical corrections.
Is there a motion?
Make that motion.
Hearing a motion and a second, is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? The motion passes.
Thank you. Just a couple board updates. In 2025, we contracted with WTax to provide tax reclamation services for eligible international taxes on certain investments. The first available WTax reclaims report is included in this month's materials. The report will be available semi-annually. If you have any questions on the content or would like to see additional information, please let me know, and I will discuss it with the tax reclaim team. For the prior two tax years, we annually purchased a tax program called Accountability that works with Pension Bridge for encryption and secure upload to the IRS FIRE system. Pension Bridge provides the 1099 data for the annual 1099-R tax forms, which is encrypted as part of the upload to the secure IRS filing system. The IRS is moving to a new filing system, IRIS. IRIS has additional security and documentation that we need to complete prior to being able to submit our 2026 filing that is due in March of 2027. We're working with the Controller's Office to complete these documents to be ready for the 2026 filing year. Accountability has been updated to align with the new IRIS system requirements. The Retirement Office will hold the certifications for the IRIS system, which the County Controller's Office will also be able to utilize for their tax submittals. We anticipate testing the systems in the fourth quarter when the 2026 accountability software is available. In response to the financial wellness RFP that was in last month's board materials, the proposal, an evaluation summary of the two proposals is included in the solicitor's report this month. At the August 2026 meeting, the solicitor will make a recommendation for approval and authorization for the incumbent. And finally, the medical examination RFP response is in final review, and the solicitor will provide a summary recommendation at the August 2026 meeting.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you.
Next, we have Brian Gabriel from Campbell Durant.
Thank you, Erica. The solicitor's report of June 11, if you look on the first page under new matters, the first two items were just mentioned by Carol. They just pertain to the status of the RFPs and the upcoming recommendation in August. The memo analyzing the wellness RFP was attached to the solicitor's report. After that, the third item under new matters is the Global Business Travel Group, and there is an action item and a recommendation here through Class Action Council. The basis for the recommendation, and it's a recommendation to authorize a books and records inspection. The basis for that recommendation is described in the report, and it's also a scenario where we discussed with council the limited authorization, meaning this is not an authorization to file litigation beyond the books and records stage, and we do not anticipate seeking that authorization in the future. And so with that background and with the background in the report, there is that agenda item.
Thank you. Is there a motion to authorize the Lebaton, Keller, Sakuro to submit a books and records demand under Delaware law to Global Business Travel Solutions, Inc.?
Make that motion.
Hearing a motion and a second, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? Motion passes. Thank you.
And I had no other items to bring to the board's attention, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
No questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, we have our consultants from Acrisure, Rah Actuaries, Brad Rigby and Todd Kordecki.
I love the greeting that we get here. Appreciate it very much.
We try.
Even after Sarah earlier walked through a lot of the information that we provided to her, you still treat us with that welcome, which is nice. We have a very brief update for you today due to the time of year. Also want to give you an update of timing on the 2026 valuation process so that it can align with other items that you want to accomplish in the third quarter. That being said, we'll jump into the materials. I'll start on page 2 because we normally, even though we skip over this, we did make a couple of updates in your objectives and your goals here that we illustrate to account for the working group efforts and initiatives, recommendations, and discussions that have gone on there. We also removed the item that had in a short-term objective reaching $1 billion in assets, in large part because you have done that, also because that was originally instituted as an effort to try to implement some automatic COLAs or some ad hoc COLAs, and given the working group efforts, that has no longer necessarily been the target upon which you would make such ad hoc decisions. But all that being said, we still want this to, even though it may be updated a little bit now to reflect the current situation, we still want this slide to be like a living, breathing item that we maybe talk about and reflect over the years as new positions come into place. You come up with some of the solutions and institute various changes that are possible. We could make this something that we're focused on going forward.
I'm going to make one little addition. I know you and I had
Yep.
talked about this. Under short term, it says limit contribution increases. I was specifically thinking of employee contribution increases. So, and also just sort of as part of that, these are sort of Brad and I's discussion that I think reflects the like intention of the board at this point, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's like in stone or that we had these are the short-term goals meeting. But thank you.
Okay, let's jump ahead to page 4, where we are showing you the solvency projection updated for financials through the end of March. The first 2 months of that quarter were strong, but then the last month, the month of March, was a rough one. But it still brought back to roughly the 7%, maybe slightly under the 7% annualized pace. So we actually don't see any change from what we presented at the last meeting, which is that the fund is still on pace to reach insolvency in 2043, which is good because that ties in with the report that Sarah walked through and is illustrated. 2043 is the time frame should nothing change. The brown line and this gold line, whatever it is, also remains unchanged in that under current scenarios where the only funding mechanism to solve this is an even contribution rate by party, it would still be 14.5% by party to avoid insolvency at any point in time. That doesn't necessarily mean that we get to a funded percentage within 20 years. That's not what it is. It's just to make sure that we don't hit zero assets. But I know that's not the objective, as we just discussed, and there are going to be solutions coming forward that find a fix that's not the current law as it exists.
Thank you. Oh, that's all of it?
That's all of
Are
this.
are there any questions for the actuaries on this piece?
All right, if I may provide a quick update on the 26 valuation process. We are currently updating the census forward to 1/1/26, as is the standard process, and are hoping to get that completed. As is normally the case, we have a handful of questions as we check for internal consistency with prior years, just to make sure that everything's understandable and that we've reconciled things appropriately to reflect the valuation census that we'll use for this year. We'll work with Carol and team to reconcile those questions quickly. But we expect that we'll be able to produce a valuation report for delivery at the September meeting, which would be our next scheduled presentation. And prior to that, have valuation results completed so that they might be used in any other analysis, not just for projections like what we went through here, which we would update to the new year, but contribution rate recommendations and things of that sort, should you want to accelerate the time frame. We'll be able to handle that in late August, early September.
Thank you. And I know I appreciate that your team's been able to work towards this newer date from what is, I think, historically been a November presentation. So thank you. Any questions? We've got one little new business item. So thank you, Acrisure. Mariner Institutional has a quick update, and then I think that might be the last item of business. Come on up. Oh, he doesn't get to be Brad or, oh, he gets to be Tim. Oh, you get to be Tim. You are Tim. Tim Walters from Mariner Institutional.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. On Thursday, June 11th, we received a client consent assignment from Stone Ridge Investment Partners. They are one of your alternative private real asset managers. So just a week ago, we know that the board does not prefer kind of intra-meeting decisions to be made on short notice. But in the analysis of this client consent request, they are asking that essentially the agreement that you signed in 2015 with them be combined because they are restructuring from a legal perspective. It does not change anything from the investment side of their product. And we did forward it to the solicitor, and he has reviewed it, and I believe he does not have an issue with either consenting or not consenting, which essentially will provide positive consent no matter what.
And did you, and you all were, Mariner was fine with the way it was written and everything?
Correct. We just weren't fine with the short notice.
Yes. And did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think the main objective was to make sure that substantively there was no issue. Procedurally, because of the timing and the fact that it's not on the agenda, it's simpler under the circumstances not to take official action, but by default, that will be a consent with their timeline and with their form.
Okay. So it's recommended, oh, go ahead.
I also just should note, I neglected, I did pass it out to all the board members. It is kind of a two-page, very simple consent assignment that they sent out.
Can you remind us about how much money do we have invested with Stone Ridge?
I believe it's close to 20 million.
Okay. Are there any questions about our no action here? All right, thank you so much. Is there any other business? Our next meeting is August 20th, 2026. Have a great July. And a motion to adjourn? Second. All right. Have a great day.